Good afternoon. I'm Alex Maragos. We are waiting on Mayor Brandon Johnson to begin a press conference following yesterday's primary election. Of course, City Council was also just held today. Let's now take you live to City Hall, where the mayor will just start speaking.
Mission of fair, equitable, and transparent employment practices. Tom Carney and his entire family, they rode deep. Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Transportation, a longtime CDOT employee in several roles, including First Deputy Commissioner. And then, of course, Mrs. Hernandez Tomlin, Commissioner of the Department of Fleet and Facility Management, who brings nearly 2 decades of experience of working with the city in her position at 2FM. And last but not least, the most famous Cubs fan now in the history of Chicago, Jose Tirado, Executive Director of the Office of Emergency Management and Communications, whose deep expertise and commitment to our city is well documented. He will continue to modernize OMC and ensure that our city is ready to respond to all of our residents' needs. Congratulations to all of them. I'm extremely proud to work with each of you to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago. So please just indulge me. Let's give them a nice, warm round of applause. Also today, City Council, we honored and celebrated Women's History Month, a month where we recognize the contributions and achievements of women who have built and shaped this great city that we live in today. And throughout the month of March and beyond, I'm committed to uplifting the accomplishments and the enduring impact of women in our world. I also want to take this moment especially to recognize all of the women who lead and work for the city of Chicago. Thank you. My deputy mayors of labor, education, infrastructure, policy, immigration, migrant and refugee rights, business, economic development, my deputy chief of staff, to the budget director, IGA director, and every woman who is in my administration, all the women who serve the city council, our women who are serving as commissioners, the policy, all of these women ensure that the greatest city in the world can grow and thrive, and we can do that with love and compassion. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And with that, I'll take questions. Hey, I'm well, thank you.
I wanted to ask you what I hope is a quick question before I get to my question. Have you gotten a readout from the FOP hearing today?
I have not.
All right, thank you. Lots to talk about with Bring Chicago Home. It looks like it's headed for defeat. Let me ask it this way. A year ago, it looked like your coalition was unstoppable based on your win in the election. Then 6 months ago, it looked like you were strong based on your early city council legislative victories. But today, you woke up with cracked armor. Do you need to slow down or reset, whether in substance or style?
I really love the commentating, by the way. So first of all the results are, the votes have not been counted. So that has not been declared just yet. You know, look, there are 68,000 people who are unhoused. That's the focus. 1 in 4 black children will experience homelessness in the city of Chicago throughout their education career. That's the primary focus here. That's the issue that we have to solve. And, you know, no one said it was going to be easy, you know, but the fact of the matter is in this moment that you have, you know, a very low turnout. It's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we are engaging the people of Chicago in a way that maximizes the fullness of democracy. You know, so you know the $250 million that I've dedicated to the unhoused, a brand new chief homelessness officer. The last I checked, though, that the people of Chicago are still very much committed to addressing and solving this issue. So, very much committed. The fight still goes on.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Given how integral Bring Chicago Home has been to your mayoral agenda, should the referendum's outcome, whatever it is, also be a referendum on your administration and progressive movement taking charge?
All right, so we have abolished sub-minimum wage. We are the largest space right now where paid time off is available to so many people. Treatment, not trauma, opening up mental health clinics. Again, $250 million into the unhoused, $100 million of violence prevention, making sure that we actually have an fully elected representative school board. The progressive agenda is not dedicated to one issue. This is the unique thing about running an entire city of Chicago. you get to address everything. And we're doing that. We're doing that. We're still strong.
And to follow up on that, if it loses, what's next? Will you go to Springfield? Will you try again in November?
We're going to keep organizing. No, we're going to keep organizing. Look, you all know who I am, right? We're going to keep organizing. Again, the results are not in, but I can tell you this, though, where this issue is, where the greatest impact of those who are experiencing being unhoused, there are a lot more yeses there. A lot more yeses. So, we have to continue to organize to make sure that we're bringing our neighbors along who may not be as impacted by this issue. But, to be the mayor of the city of Chicago, where I once upon a time took an arrest at the very elevators that now are held for me. This is the greatest city in the world. There's not a fight that we have not taken on that we won't have the ability to win. And that's the important thing here. And the progressive agenda, again, from dealing with mental health, dealing with education, dealing with workers, that progressive agenda is expansive, as it should be. 40 plus years, decades of disinvestment. And I'm grateful that we have a lot of people who are committed to seeing the transformation that propelled me into office.
Afternoon, Mayor. Yesterday's election, there were 3 ballot referendums, the 13th, 23rd, and 36th Ward, where voters overwhelmingly voted to call on the city to reopen additional police districts in response to lagging response times. Is that something that you are open to, adding additional police districts, especially in the 12th and 8th district that have seen really expansive police districts and had trouble getting people to 911 calls promptly?
Well, there's been a lot of cuts over the course of decades in this city, as you know, from closing of schools, public housing, mental health clinics. Our approach to public safety is holistic. And so, my deputy mayor for community safety is here. Our approach is comprehensive. And policing is just one tool in the toolbox to address public safety in this city. So, I'm willing to sit down with individuals in those particular precincts and to have further conversations about what it means to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi.
Last week, the Chicago Sun-Times reported on multiple archdiocese properties that supposedly they were offering up for free, but they did not hear back from your office. Can you tell me, is the city considering those over the properties that the city's renting for, in some cases, over market rate?
Well, first of all, it's inaccurate. So there have been a number of archdiocese buildings that have not been suitable for this mission. I can tell you that. And we're working with the archdiocese to bring one online. There's a whole lot that goes into opening up a shelter, and I can tell you I've become an expert at it. We were opening up shelters once a week when I was first sworn in. So I'm grateful that we have a partnership with the archdiocese, but it's not just as simple as here's a building, take it. There's work that has to be done to build it out, to make it suitable for shelter. So it's not entirely accurate of how it's being portrayed, that essentially there are a lot of people who have offered up buildings, right? But it doesn't mean they were suitable for this mission.
So,
And they weren't necessarily even offered up entirely for free. In fact, part of the agreement initially was it was not offered up as free. There were later conversations that there would be some flexibility with the first 6 months, but not, in perpetuity. So we are still working with the archdiocese, and I'm grateful for the leadership of Cardinal Supich, who has been a part of these conversations as well.
So I can confirm you're considering one, but no more.
Right now, there is one that is close to being put online. There are considerations for lots of buildings, but again, the building has to be suitable to be able to meet the needs of this mission.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the settlements that were approved today by the City Council. $45 million for an unauthorized police chase, $5 million on top of the $55 million that's already spent on the Guevara case. What does this say about the police department and what work still needs to be done when it comes to the constitutional policing that you've been trying to address?
Well, one of the things that Superintendent Selling and I speak about regularly is the type of training that we have to make available for officers who are coming into the force. And I'm grateful that there are scores and scores of officers who have gone through this training, many of whom have been trained by Superintendent Snelling, and we're seeing better practices. Still a lot of work to be done, no doubt about that. It also speaks to just the decades of negligence. Some of these things, as you know, predate my existence, right? They go back to a time before I was even born. So there's a lot of time that has elapsed over the course of decades now where this has become an erosion. And working with our new superintendent, who I have confidence in, to not only provide training for our officers to ensure that constitutional policing is the prevailing form of governance, but also making sure that we are responding to emergencies in a holistic way. There are certain instances where law enforcement is showing up and it's not a law enforcement response. That's why I'm committed to growing our treatment, not trauma, operation and working with advocates so that we can have mental health providers that are showing up to scenes where mental health professionals are a better response to the crisis.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
The Civic Federation said last week that they didn't believe that voters had enough information on Bring Chicago Home to make an informed decision one way or the other. So that being said, if this referendum question does continue in some fashion, do you think that progressives ought to present or make a better case to voters about how that money will be used? And do you think that they made the best case to voters this time around?
Look, I think political engagement is something that we all should participate and engage in. I don't know if that should be confined to progressives, by the way. And I like them, by the way. I like progressives a lot. But I would not put the responsibility on educating voters solely on progressives. All of us have to participate in this democratic process to ensure that the people who count on us to deliver high-quality services for them, that they know exactly what they're getting. And what I've said from day one, from the time that I announced my candidacy to the time that I was sworn in, that the best thing that we can do for the people of Chicago is to invest in them, to invest in people. I don't know how many more conversations are required in different parts of the city to make sure that becomes ingrained into the ecosystem of politics. But the safest communities in the world invest in people. We have 68,000 people who are unhoused. The vast majority of them are black people. We put forth a measure to address that. We did. Now, as far as the forces who may not have the same amount of urgency, the people who are impacted, we got to do a better job to help them understand as well. Because you all know my personal story. I had an older brother who had untreated trauma and died addicted and unhoused. That's what we are working to solve for. And so that work continues, and I'm very much motivated to continue to do that.
Mayor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Many who've stood at your podium have talked about how elections have consequences, and I want to ask you one more question about Bring Chicago Home. Some of your critics have said this is certainly a signal that this is a pump the brakes moment on the mayor's agenda. Would you agree with that? How would you frame it?
I believe that the 68,000 people in this city who are unhoused deserve a champion, and they got one. They do. But this is not something that gets solved by one person. All right, I'm going to do it, okay? Because I'm going to be especially vulnerable here. You all know how the rules were played out in this particular ballot referendum, and I worked within the confines of those rules. Now, there's to date, my record of being able to compel and campaign and convince, there were some limitations to how I can engage in this moment. That was frustrating, but make no mistake about it. If anyone believes that one issue that we still have to address is going to cause me to put the brakes on my agenda, well, they missed the city council today, because we are moving forward with the $1.25 billion bonds deal that's going to invest in people, because that's what I promised that I was going to do, and that's what I'm doing, and that's what I will continue to do. So guess what? Buckle up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I was wondering if you could put on your organizer hat for a moment as a former organizer and talk about, with regard to Bring Chicago Home, when a defeat like this is suffered, how does the movement pivot? It's, you've suffered defeats before as an organizer. What's the pivot here, and how does the organizing change moving forward?
Well, the organizing is something that really is an integral part of the history of Chicago. I'm not the only executive to serve as an organizer. Now, there's an ongoing debate on whether or not President Obama and myself, who was the better organizer, but we'll leave that for another conversation. But since we're quoting famous people, it was a very famous person, I'll let you look him up, but it talks about people who either attack or critique from the sideline, individuals who have never participated in a game. So they don't know the difference between winning or being defeated because they never participated. The amount of loss that we've experienced in this city, 350,000 black people who have been displaced in this city over the course since 1980. Brown people who are being priced out of their communities. The organizing doesn't pivot. The organizing gets stronger. Because the same organizing that had to deal with the loss of schools, housing, mental health clinics, jobs, that's the same organizing that propelled me into this office. We get stronger. And whatever we didn't get the first time, we'll get even more the next time.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I'm Michael Liptrot with Southside Weekly.
You knew, have I seen you before?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's your name?
Michael Liptrot. We met at a WBEZ forum.
I see. Okay, well, that was a big room. I'm talking about like one-on-one. Okay, it's good to see you again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As mentioned with the question earlier, today the city of Chicago passed a resolution toward the largest police settlement in history. And in your response, you mentioned trainings. Can you be more specific on these trainings, and how will these trainings prevent such tragedies in the future?
Well, first of all, it is a tragedy. It is. This particular officer was engaged in an act that is not permitted. And the breadth of training that we have available, it's everything from responding to crises to responding to outbreaks, or when people are demonstrating and expressing their First Amendment right. Trainings in how we engage in a culturally competent way. In fact, the last graduation, I'm sorry you missed it. I can't remember the officer's name now. It'll come back to me. But she talked about how there was a situation where there was an emergency and a brother was having a tough time in that moment. And there were other officers who were not demonstrating the type of sensitivity and cultural competence that was needed in that moment. And she stepped in and provided that. It's trainings like that that we have to make sure that people know that the communities in which they're serving in, that there are dynamics that translate differently. It's not that much different than how we train educators. Like, there has to be an appreciation, quite frankly, for the level of mistrust that exists in certain communities, and understanding and being empathetic. And so I'm happy to make sure that the superintendent, provides you, if you want some specifics around how long those trainings are, how many people are signing up, how many folks have been trained, we can get that to you. Thank you.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
Wanted to go back to the migrant shelters just for a moment. The city's website does provide an overview of how hundreds of $millions of dollars have been spent on the migrant mission thus far. But what it doesn't do is give the people of Chicago a more detailed view of where those dollars have flowed in terms of who financially benefits from those buildings. We've spent months trying to ask for lease agreements and been told in some cases the city doesn't have them because of the way it's structured with third-party organizations. Would you be in support of additional calls for more transparency, more sharing of documents on the city's website so that people know where millions of dollars have flowed, who's financially benefited from this?
Commissioner Kanazi is here. She can speak to some of the lease agreements. Again, from the very beginning of this mission, I've been open and transparent about how dollars are being appropriated. I have been. The previous city council punted $51 million was one of my first acts. I actually expressed breaking news from Mayor Brandon Johnson, $47 million went to one particular entity, of which we renegotiated that, along with food contracts, with staffing. So, as far as some of the specifics pertaining to these buildings, we'll turn it over to the commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There's a couple ways that we go. One, we look to see what city assets that we have that we can leverage, and we try to do that. You've seen us do that with former school buildings, with Wadsworth, as well as for, Park District, locations that we use. Second way is direct leases, and so we'll do that with the Office of Emergency Management and Communication. They work with AIS and are able to sign leases. And then the third way that we leverage leases is with Equitable Social Solutions. So have a contract that allows us to support our homeless population, where we're able to lease spaces, and so we leverage that for the new arrivals mission. And so from there, we're able to work with them, and they're able to work with the party that's able to go into spaces that we necessarily can't go into in order to lease. And so that's where a number of those leases are. So I think, it's a lot about just trying to really figure out, one, large spaces. The mayor talked about spaces have to be large enough to hold, a couple hundred people. We have to have dining spaces. It has to have, bathrooms and such like that. But those are where those leases are. And I think, we'll continue to, really put forth. I think what's important to know is that this is a massive mission. The city of Chicago, we support, our homeless population for homeless shelters, but we don't directly operate. In this particular mission, we are managing over 11,000 beds. At the height, we were at 15,000. So I think it's just, you're meeting us where we are, as we're really just trying to really wrap our head around and really stabilize the mission to go forward.
It's